Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a bit more dramatic last couple days behind the scenes, but everything's good. We've found and purchased two of the machines that I wanted to get for the bindery. Now here's hoping we can get them installed and operating without hazard, without any issues. But you know, we've learned our lesson, and actually I made some really fascinating discoveries about the history of leather bookbinding in America. Actually, the history of semi-automated leather bookbinding in America. And the bad news is that I don't think that the quality of our leather is as good as it should be on the regular library history books, compared to the past. I mean, we're doing exactly what the industry leader does, which was the correct thing to do when you're learning what you're doing. Once you learn what you're doing, then you can start questioning, you know, is this really the best way to do this? And so far, everything that I'm learning from talking to people who were in the industry 40 years ago, 50 years ago, is no, you're really not. It probably won't come to as a surprise to anyone who has bought a single consumer good or turned on a computer in the past 20 years, but the corporations today are just continually making suboptimal choices with regards to quality and just constantly driving the bar lower and lower in the interest of theoretically increasing their profits. You know, it's a fool's bargain in my opinion. So you're going to see Castalia doing the exact opposite. We're going to be continuing to push to increase our quality, and it's going to take some time. You know, we're already doing really excellent stuff compared to everything else that's out there, but it's not necessarily at the level of some of the best stuff of the past. So we have our objectives are set. We know what we need to do. Some things that we want to do are not possible. You know, factories, the only factories that produce certain things no longer exist. But that doesn't mean we can't figure it out, or even eventually perhaps one day build our own. So one step at a time. But that's not what I do have something to show you later in the stream, but that's not what I was going to talk about today. What I was actually going to talk about today is the fascinating way that people's reactions, even people's hypothetical reactions to scenarios posed to them, is extremely revelatory with regards to their behavioral patterns and their sociosexual hierarchy profile. And the reason I say this is not only is it something that I've observed many times before, you've observed many times before, but today I put up a post on Sigma Game, and a reader had drawn my attention in an email to a brief encounter 10-15 years ago between Tom Cruise and a reporter, a prankster, who took advantage of the cameras for his the television show which he was working on. He'd been told to squirt a water bottle on Tom Cruise. And the way that Cruise handled it was very effective. And the reader correctly ascertained that this was a way that an alpha addressed a situation where a gamma was behaving badly. And it was kind of fascinating because, you know, by the end of it, you could see that the gamma who had, you know, attempted to embarrass Tom Cruise ended up, you know, walking away practically in tears. And it was interesting, not so much for what it showed about about actual alpha behavior. What was interesting was the way that the people who read the site and comment on it were talking about it. And you know, the funniest thing, of course, is that it's always the lowest ranking men who inevitably envision the most extreme reactions. You know, well, what I would have done is I would have grabbed the water bottle out of his hand and pulled him over the ropes and beaten him over the head with it. Then I would have pulled his pants down and jammed that water bottle right up his backside, and then I would have kicked his head in. I mean, anytime you see somebody produce something like that, you can be pretty confident that he's never even kissed a girl before. You know, it's somebody whose life experience is entirely up there in their own head. You know, when they talk about green soldiers who have never seen combat, and the difference between them and the veterans. The most significant difference between the inexperienced troops and the veterans, and there are a lot of differences, but the most significant one is that the inexperienced soldiers think in terms of what they can do or will do to the enemy. The veterans are entirely focused on what the enemy can do to them. That's why they keep their heads down. That's why they don't volunteer for dangerous night missions. That's why eventually they become increasingly less combat effective over time, and they need to be sent away from the front and so forth, because they essentially just become unwilling to fight. I mean, this is, of course, why they normally draft young men, because the young men are clueless enough to be totally unaware of the likelihood that something bad is going to happen to them or those around them. You know, and I suspect that that's where a lot of what they call shell shock or post-traumatic stress disorder and so forth come from, is the incredible amount of cognitive dissonance that hits the human brain, the human mind, when someone who previously believed themselves to be beyond harm suddenly realizes just how disastrous and how extreme that level of harm could be. And I mean, obviously there's other aspects and elements to it as well, but I do think that might play a part. And I thought that was something that was really well handled in the series Band of Brothers, for example, and also in that the one written by the Marine that was set in the South Pacific. It was a little more disjointed. It wasn't as effective as a story, but in terms of the actual experience, it showed, you know, the effects on the individual over time of these terrible experiences. And you know, the lower your status is generally, the less experience you have of a range of human experiences. You literally don't know what it's like to have a large group of people appreciate you. You don't know what it's like to have a girl look at you with a sparkle in her eyes. And so what you do naturally is you fill in the blanks. You try to imagine what it's like. I mean, I can remember when we were in, I believe, 7th grade. It was my first year at the private academy that I attended. And I had come over, like most of the others. This was not like, this wasn't one of the fancier schools. It was a religious school. And at the time, 7th grade was the first year you could enter it. So most of us were coming into that academy from public schools, which meant that we had a very different perspective than some of the counterparts who had been private schooled the whole time. At this time, this is a long time ago. Nobody was homeschooled. The only kind of kid who'd be homeschooled might be somebody who was really, really sick or really, really injured. I mean, even John Scalzi, who I believe he was in a car accident or something. It really helps you understand a lot more about him when you know that he was in some sort of car accident and was effectively in a wheelchair in his I don't know if it was like junior high or elementary school, but he was in a wheelchair and couldn't go outside for recess. He had to like stay inside at recess with the school nurse. But even though he was that badly injured, he didn't stay at home and homeschool. It wasn't an option at the time for anybody, or it wasn't something that people really even imagined. And so we had because people were coming from a pretty broad spectrum of socioeconomic, religious, etc. You had some kids who were a bit tougher. You had some kids who were more sheltered. It was really kind of an interesting melange that I don't think exists there anymore, because by the time I went to, they bought another school that had moved that was about 2 miles away, and then they first introduced 7th and 8th grade down there, and that was an odd experience. We had 7th and 8th graders in this school that was built to be a full-blown school, but not anywhere nearly enough students to fill up the school. And so it was you could get up to shenanigans, let's just put it that way. But then before I graduated, they had actually added the elementary school. So you had the range from 1st through 8th at the South Campus and the 9th through 12th at the North Campus. And so I think that by the time my brothers, who were 10 years younger, they went there starting in 1st and 3rd grade, and so they went all the way through the system. And I think by the time they hit junior high, you had a much more homogenous experiences for the kids attending. But anyhow, what I remember in 7th grade once was there's this kid named Al, and it was kind of funny because he wasn't a bad-looking guy, and he wasn't small. I mean, he was nearly a full head taller than me. He wasn't even particularly physically awkward. Like some tall guys, they can be sort of gawky and clumsy, especially when you're, what, 13. But there was just something fundamentally off about him. I mean, he was 100% an omega. And I mean, I don't even remember like which group of, if he would have lunch with some of the losers, or whether he'd, usually eat by himself. I can't recall. But I do distinctly remember one day that the most popular guys and some of the most popular girls, they were all sitting at the lunch table with him. And I remember thinking, well, that's odd. What on earth are Alex and Gina and, the Eric and the popular people, what on earth are they doing having lunch with Al? And I was pretty sure that they were mocking him somehow. And they were, but they weren't being cruel about it. That's one thing that was actually quite nice about my junior high and high school, is that, yeah, we had all the usual hierarchy stuff, but the people that were at the top were actually pretty good people, both now and even looking back in retrospect. I mean, yeah, they would do things, occasionally that would illustrate their superior social position and so forth, but it really wasn't very mean-spirited. I mean, the funniest thing is probably the second quote-unquote meanest thing that anyone ever did to me socially was my best female friend. I think I've told you about that before, the homecoming announcements. But so you had this private Christian academy of people who were, I would say, generally more culturally Christian than particularly religious, all of whom had, or not all of them, but quite a few of whom had grown up in the public schools. And so it was just kind of an interesting, looking back, it was kind of an interesting social experiment. But they were all pretty good people. If among my many regrets, I'm sorry that I never stayed in touch with any of them and never went to any of the reunions. More about that mindset later. But what was fascinating looking back on it was they were quizzing Al about sex. And what I realized, I actually walked over, and I was on, decent terms with some of them, and I was just like, what's going on? Why are you talking to Al? I mean, it's not like I was going to police the popular people, but there was just something obviously wrong about the situation, or at least unusual about the situation. And everyone was like laughing, but not openly. Like they were all like trying to restrain themselves. And so I said, well, what's so funny? And one of the girls looked over at me, and she was actually our eventual homecoming queen. And she looked over at me, and her eyes were just dancing with amusement. And she said, Al is telling us all about sex. I said, okay. Because, I think of the total group, I think that maybe 2 or 3 of them at the time, at most, would have been mildly active in that regard. And so probably not fully, but there's probably some level of beyond the typical junior high thing. Clearly nothing like my public school, but anyhow, we're like, what do you mean? And I said, what? And yeah, Al knows all about it. He does it all the time. I'm just thinking, oh no, because I mean, I'm pretty close to bottom of the totem pole myself. The only reason that I've got a connection to these people for the most part is because I'm one of the better soccer players in for my year, and also I was a year advanced from everybody except for one person in my year. They bumped me up a year in math, um, so I had a little bit of because I was treated well by the people that were a year ahead of us. That they would usually respect that. Anyhow, I didn't say anything more. I just said, "Oh," and I'm thinking this can't be good. And I just sat down at the next table and watched and listened with what was initially pity and then became horror. And then I was trying not to laugh myself because this Omega just dug a grave for himself socially that was so deep. I'm surprised that he didn't learn Chinese. I mean, it was literally the single biggest social self implosion that I have ever witnessed in my entire life. And nobody was making him do it. Nobody, it wasn't like, this wasn't some cruel trick. This wasn't like, the movies where the popular people decide to victimize the guy. It was clear that the guy had been attracted to one of the popular girls and was trying to impress her with his non-existent sexual exploits. And his ideas about what the process was, what the various attributes and consequences were, had about as much to do with what even our limited knowledge, experience, and sex education classes had taught us. It was as far away from that as lacrosse is from knitting. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was literally unbelievable. I mean, it was freaking nuts. I mean, I'm not even going to share what little I can remember of it, because I was just like, what? I mean, all I can remember, and this is what I said with some amount of both horror and amusement, it actually, insects were brought up. Okay. You're just like, were you missing on the day that you had, the various, did your school just not have any sort of education? Did you never read a book? And the thing is, Ironic Keyboard said, did he realize he was imploding? No. When he saw people laughing, he was like kind of laughing with them. Like, you're just like, I mean, and not that he was like in a good position before that socially, but I mean, that was the sort of thing that you were never, ever going to recover from. Of course, he was such an Omega and so just not mentally present for the most part that I genuinely don't know if he ever really realized it fully, I don't think he was ever fully cognizant of what a complete and total, he wasn't even a social reject. I mean, no one had to reject him. I mean, he was probably integral in my instinctively understanding the concept of an omega. And, the strangest thing about it is if I showed you a picture of him from the yearbook, you probably would have thought he was above average, just in terms of physical appearance and so forth. And so it shows you how even at a fairly young age, because we would have been, I was 13, everybody would have been 13 and 14 years old. We all instinctively understood on some level that there was just something fundamentally off about this guy. Not in a dangerous way, not in a threatening way, not even in an annoying way. I mean, you would talk to him. You wouldn't talk to him very long. And even like the most popular guys would say hello to him, but there was always a note in the voice. There's always this note in the voice like, "Hey, Al," like slightly high pitched, just sort of like "What you doing, Al? What sort of insanity is going to come out of your mouth now?" And I mean, I have no idea what happened to him. I don't remember if he even graduated with us or not. Because like I said, total non-entity. But all of us reveal aspects of who and what we are, even in our hypothetical reactions. I just posted an update on that particular post at Sigma Game, because one of the things I said is, the person who had emailed me originally said, this, I think we can learn some interesting things about how alphas handle conflict and confrontation posed to them by gammas within their hierarchy. And he said, I'm curious to know what the sigma reaction would be. And so I went ahead and just told the readers, hey, go ahead and take your shot. Tell me what you think. And it was really interesting to see how completely off base even these people who are regular Sigma Game readers happen to be. I mean, to me, the answer was entirely obvious. I mean, there's absolutely no question whatsoever. And, and so you had some of these sort of weird gamma imaginations, like, well, what he would do is find the prettiest girl and kiss her and put his arm around and walk away with her. Like, where did that come from? Does he put on a top hat too? I mean, that's literally a visual meme from The Big Bang Theory. I've got to find that clip. I even spent about 15 minutes one day looking for it on YouTube. For some reason, apparently that perhaps it's too painful to the kind of gammas who spend their days making YouTube video clips of popular television shows. But if anybody ever finds that, definitely email me the link, because I mean, it is the perfect video illustration of what omegas and gammas imagine life as an alpha to be. And it's also very, very illustrative in terms of demonstrating the total self-centeredness I mean, that's the wrong way. The total concern for how they appear to others, they demonstrate. Because even their fantasies involve performing for others. You know, there's no self-sufficiency in them whatsoever. Their whole objective is to somehow make a positive impression on others. And so it was interesting to see some of those, and then you had some of the people that, you know, I suspect it's the Bravo instinct of, well, I just punch him in the face. Like, what? The guy, if somebody squirts water on you, you're going to break his nose? I mean, come on. And people, again, they don't realize what that response says about you. Now, the reason I suggest Bravo as a possible explanation for that is because, you know, the Bravo is fundamentally and intrinsically offended to the core at the violation of the proper hierarchy. You know, you do not go up and squirt water and try to humiliate the alpha. If you do that, you have violated the hierarchy, you have broken the social rules, and you must be punished. You know, just the thought of it makes them angry. Because it's not about the water. You know, the alpha's concerned about it too, but he doesn't care. How does splashing a little water on him, you know, trying to get people to laugh, I mean, he's going to deal with it. Tom Cruise dealt with it very well. You know, but you know, and by the end he just, you know, had reduced the guy to, you know, he'd really caused the guy to think about what he'd done, think about how inappropriate it was, and feel bad about it. You know, the answer, of course, and like I said, it should be obvious, is that doesn't happen to a Sigma because the Sigma isn't there in the first place. Not going to happen. And it's kind of funny because some people were, you know, I knew that some people were going to say, well, I mean, that's not the question. That's not the point. I mean, he had to be there, blah, blah. No, he didn't. He absolutely didn't have to be there. But he's a big, important movie star. Precisely. There's absolutely no need to be there. No need to be going to a public premiere in the first place. No need to go over to a reporter, you know, with a TV camera offering an interview. And what's amusing about that response is it demonstrates how difficult it is for people outside of the hierarchy, which is, you know, 95% of everybody, maybe even more, to understand the perspective of the Omegas and the Sigmas. You know, I mean, I tried to put it in perspective when I was explaining this. I said, look, when I was in Psychosonic, Wax Trax, our record label, and TVT Records, our publisher, really wanted us to go on tour. The idea was that we'd do a European tour, build up a name, come back to the States, do a US tour. You know, we had all the ammo for it. We had 2 Billboard Top 40 club hits. We had, our music was licensed for a Super Nintendo game that Activision was putting out. We had a good live show. You know, we really had the crowd completely into it at both First Avenue and Glam Slam. So we knew that we had a good show, we had good songs. We didn't do it because I didn't want to go. I had no desire whatsoever to go. I was much more interested in getting my computer game company started. The Big Chili and I were working hard on that. We were very, very excited about the new 3D technology that Chris Taylor and I had envisioned was beginning to come to life. And I understood that at that point that the economics of the music industry were significantly less favorable than the opportunity that we had presented to become essentially what is NVIDIA today. You may or may not know that, you may or may not believe it, but the point is, at that time, we were in the favorable position to become what is now NVIDIA. I'll do a stream sometime on exactly how and why that opportunity was both blown and just we had multiple chances to do it and failed on multiple levels in multiple ways, plus just had bad luck. But the point is that that opportunity was just fundamentally more important to me than going on tour, picking up girls, getting famous, etc., etc. So, you cannot tell me that, but you have to do it. Believe me, we had plenty of pressure. Oh, you need to do this. You have to do this. And of course, to somebody who is outside of that perspective, you're just looking at them like they're crazy. Like, I don't have to do anything. Well, but if you don't, then you can't become this. Well, okay. And you won't be able to do that. Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't hate the idea of that. And if I didn't have this other stuff going on, then yeah, I'd probably be delighted to do it. I mean, it sounds like a great opportunity. Sounds wonderful. But I have other plans. And no matter how much the Gamma wants to think that he's a Sigma, no matter how much you're like, well, I'm pretty introverted. Sometimes I'm not in the mood to go to a party. It is as obvious to someone like me that there's a fundamental perspective gap between us as it was to that group of 13-year-old kids listening to this other 13-year-old kid tell them his wild and totally insane imaginations about what sex is. I mean, it's totally and completely obvious. And it's important, I think, to remember that in a broad context. You're not ever going to fool anyone. For some reason, most men have the ability to look at other people and see how transparent their motivations and their behavioral patterns and their true intentions are. But for some reason, we often have a tendency to think that our own can be obscured. We want to believe that we are something that we are not, so we pretend that we are, and so forth. And but you're not fooling anyone. Maybe you're fooling yourself. Obviously, some people do manage to fool themselves. I frankly don't really understand how, but it's very clear that they do. And never forget, especially when you are inclined to want to attack another person, what you say about that other person is explaining to them what you are. Chris Hawk says, hence ankle biting. Maybe they want to believe someone else is fooling them. Could be. I don't think so, but I suppose it's possible. I mean, the main thing that I see is that, I'll see these gammas, and this is, this goes back to like 2004 or so, 2005 maybe, once the blog got popular enough that it started attracting people for various reasons. And what was interesting about it was that they would say these things that at the time struck me as just totally insane. Like, where did that come from? They would say things like, you've never been on a date with a girl in your life. And it was totally mystifying to me because, I mean, even if you think that I'm, fat, ugly, and bald, or now old, which is legitimate. But even if you thought that, I mean, it's public knowledge that I used to be in a successful band, right? It's public knowledge that my parents were wealthy and I used to drive a Porsche, right? Now, I mean, I understand, there's some people who are so absolutely awful and unattractive and screwed up that no sorts of social advantages are going to accrue to any benefit to them at all. But, I mean, come on, I mean, it's just absurd. Like, if you know certain basic facts about someone, then you know that other hypotheses are natural consequences of those facts that you know. And yet they would insist, like, because this is before I understood the concept of gamma. This is before I, understood this in anything but an instinctive way. I would try to point out to them that they were wrong, and it didn't matter. I mean, I could have literally filmed a sex tape with the entire Dallas Cowboy cheerleader squad, shown it to them, and they would have accused me of, hiring an actor to play me, or, these days, producing a deep fake. Cactus Heater Bear says, Gamma, yep. This SSH test is legit. It confirmed I'm a Sigma. Well, here's the funny thing, is that they all thought they were alphas before. If we invented something that was even higher status than either alpha or sigma, they would immediately identify with that because they are the secret kings in their own head. But this general concept that I'm talking about how your reactions expose who and what you are, how your interpretations expose who and what you are, it applies to everybody. The super alpha. But see, the funny thing is, everybody gets it wrong. Everybody, not just the gammas, not just the omegas. Why? Because the delta doesn't understand how much responsibility the alpha has. So the mere fact of the response to a hypothetical situation being focused solely on himself automatically identifies him as being below the level with any responsibility to others. You know? I mean, the T-Max sends a super chat, says, the cheerleader thing sounds a little exhausting. Yeah, no doubt. Especially because, cheerleaders, especially professional cheerleaders, they keep themselves in really good shape. I used to know a number of the Vikings cheerleaders because they worked out at the same health club that I did. And, they were, when they're doing their jumping around and kicking routine for 3 solid hours, you have to be in pretty good shape to do that. Silent Draco says, Alpha is working harder than people consider. Leadership eats energy. Exactly. Why do you think that I'm so constantly resistant to people trying to put me in situations that involve any sort of responsibility or alpha, challenges? I'm too lazy for that. Sam Freeman sends his second to last super chat for now. We'll have him going soon enough. But he says, second to last tribute shekel. Fixing the wallet situation can't happen fast enough. The devs are on it. It's going well. Everything's fine. We're just doing everything one step at a time. It is kind of funny. I was talking to executive at a company about, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, and he's saying, we really need to get you on the executive board. I said, why? He said, well, you've really helped us out, and you've given us some good advice, and it'd be just really good to have you on the team. I said, but I don't want to be on the team. He said, well, we talk regularly. I said, well, yeah, I like talking to you. We chat a bit about things. If something comes up, I don't mind putting in my 2 cents, but I've got no authority, no responsibility. It's all good. He said, well, don't you want credit? Don't you want to, be on the team? I'm like, wow, you really don't know me very well, do you? I said, it's kind of like that. I can't remember what it's from. There's some, I think it was, it's actually one of my all-time favorite movies, Grosse Pointe Blank. I felt like I was living out that scene where he's with Dan Aykroyd, except for we were not shooting at each other and trying to kill each other. He's like, will there be meetings? He's like, oh yeah, we'll have lots of meetings. He's like, no meetings. If there's meetings, I'm not joining. It was just so funny, the total lack of communication, just the fundamental lack of understanding. Here, and obviously I understood this guy was paying a compliment. He was offering an opportunity. He was, in his mind, offering this precious gift. And I'm looking at it like, ew, get that away from me. Why would I ever want that? Fortunately he was not offended. He was actually pretty amused. Do all gammas hate alphas? I don't think so. I think that gammas are not just creatures, twisted creatures full of nothing but hate. You know, one aspect of the gamma is irrational love. You know, whenever somebody's like, I'm your biggest fan, I'm like, oh fuck, there's another gamma. You know, I mean, why do you think you know that especially female celebrities are terrified of their biggest fans? They instinctively know the danger that the gamma poses to them. They get it. And so when you look at, you know, that's obviously, they have this irrational love, which inevitably turns to disappointment and sometimes a feeling of rejection. And that's when the whole twisted anger process starts. Hawk has a question. How should sigmas be optimally managed then? Well, they shouldn't be managed. You know, that managed, I mean, right there is indicative of a conceptual flaw, because, you know, management implies that you are superior. You are the authority, you know, and sigmas are not conducive to that sort of relationship. He says, not reliable enough for normal freelance relations. No, actually, I mean, the main thing is that sigmas need to have objective metrics that they can either hold themselves to or not, get rewarded or not. The key to getting the sigma to achieve something is to figure out, no, but it's not a whatever. He says handled whatever. No, it's not a whatever. I mean, that's one of the points I'm trying to make in this stream is you expose your perspective through your very choice of words. I understand the question. I'm getting to the question. I'm answering the question. I'm just pointing out the way in which even just the choice of a single word provides those who are sufficiently SSH aware a tremendous amount of information. So you're stuck with one, how to get the most out of them. Give them objective metrics. And then you can either reward them and hopefully get more out of them, or you can, you have a reason and you don't have to explain it, you don't have to justify it. You know, you just gradually can phase them out if they're too distracted with whatever. You know, people tend to have an excessively positive view of alphas and being an alpha, and they also have an excessively positive view of sigmas. There's an example that a guy cited correctly of a contractor. I think he did, you know, roofs and stuff. He had a contractor who was a complete disaster because the job that the sigma had lost interest in his job, you know, in the contracting job. He did a great job on the first one, lost interest on the second one, and just couldn't be found. Wasn't around. Didn't get the work done on time. Brainline says, give the sigma the goal target, ignore the process. Exactly. You know, the way that they're going to get things done is very seldom going to be the way that you are going to get things done. It also works. Hawk is one of the devs. He says, do not look at the sigma's process as you value your sanity. Yeah, there's no process. It's all just sort of happens somehow. But, you know, it goes both ways too. I mean, you know, pretty much everyone I've ever worked with especially if they've worked for me, has complained vociferously about the complete lack of direction. You know, because I don't care how somebody gets things done as long as it's done correctly at the expected level of quality and on time. You know, I don't need to know. I don't want to know. And I really don't want you to give me the play-by-play. You know, I mean, I personally find it maddening when people want to explain to me what they've done. I did not ask. And by the same token, I really don't like it very much when people say, well, how did you do that? I don't know. I did it a few days ago. I don't even know what I was thinking then. You know, I'm not thinking about it now. I don't want to think about it. Can we talk about something else? You know, what's interesting to me is that people with experience, they clearly get it on some level. They might not know anything about the SSH at all. I'll give you an example, and I've given, but I thought this is something I really appreciated. But it's actually a theme that goes all the way back to 4th grade. You know, back in 4th grade, my favorite teacher, she's my homeroom teacher, her name was Nina. She's actually attractive. No great beauty or anything, but she was attractive, and she was smart. And you know, she told me one day, you know, I don't think you need to be in this class. You know, it was like history or something. She's like, you already know everything we're going to be covering. I think you're just going to probably be bored, and it's a little distracting for the rest of the class when you're just sitting there reading and not paying attention. Would you have any objection to going and spending that hour in the reading room? The school had this like there's a big library, but then if you went down the stairs from the library, there's this nice comfortable reading room. And I loved it. I mean, that was like my favorite part of the day. Like, you know, I would, I think it was like might have been fourth hour, but you know, fourth hour, no, it wasn't, it was sixth hour. Sixth hour would come, and I would go and I would, you know, grab a couple books from the library and go down there. You know, the biggest problem was I used to get in trouble because I would not hear the bell while I was reading, or I would ignore it. And then the teacher from my next class would have to send somebody to go get me. Eventually they got to the point where the woman who was like in charge of the reading room knew to like kick me out. Because, you know, it's not like the school staff all talked to each other or something. You know, she just knew I was allowed to be there. So, you know, she'd be like, hey, it's time to go to class. Okay, put the books away. Got a couple, we've clearly got a bug here because T-Mac can still send super chats for 0. He says, very good stream, and Q1882 still has a wallet going, and he's very generous and says stream support. So thanks to both of you. But what's interesting is, so that happened in 4th grade. And then by the time I was at university, my professors were just sending me, like, basically telling me don't take the class. You know, I told one professor that he was kind of confused as to why I wasn't doing better on the tests, because he could tell that I understood the concepts on the basis of conversations in class. And he said, I don't understand why you're missing this stuff. How do you know? How are you getting this stuff wrong? He said, I mean, it's straight out of the textbook. I said, well, yeah, I haven't read the textbook. And, you know, this is like towards the end of the semester. And I was doing fine. I was getting a B. I was happy. And I only went to class, not so much because I was concerned about learning it, but because one of my good friends was in it with me. And I liked the professor. We had stimulating discussions. It was great. And we ended up, so anyway, he says, wait, you haven't read the textbook? I said, well, no. He said, why not? I said, well, I don't have it. He said, did you lose it? I said, no, I never actually bought it. He's like, okay, why? Because, you know, I was driving an MG on campus at the time, so he knew I wasn't like, it wasn't an issue of not being able to afford it. I said, well, I don't really subscribe to the neo-Keynesian macroeconomics. So, you know, I don't really feel the need to waste my time reading, you know, literal textbook stuff. I said, I mean, I understand all the basic concepts. I said, and I don't really care if, you know, about the differences between the ISLM model and this other model and so forth. And he looked at me kind of funny and he said, yeah, Mark told me that, Mark was Mark Newman, my history professor. He said, Mark told me that you had a interesting perspective on education. He said, would you like to do an independent study with me? I said, yeah, that sounds great. And the funny thing is, as this guy knew, I mean, because you're talking about how do you make a sigma work? How do you get performance out of it? He basically found something that I was interested in and let me know that his expectations were high. And, you know, I ended up working probably 15 to 20 times harder on that paper and reading way more material than I would have had to do to get an A in the class. And I enjoyed almost every minute of it, you know? And so, you know, I mean, that's a good teacher. You know, I mean, I didn't realize at the time. I realized at the time I was fortunate. I didn't realize at the time how unusual that was and how lucky I was to have run across not one, not two, but three professors like that. You know, I ended up graduating having done 3 independent studies instead of classes. Just because the professors, actually, I think I did 4, now that I think about it. I think I did 2 for Mark, but anyhow, but it was really fantastic because, you know, they clearly understood, hey, this particular environment doesn't work for this particular individual. Let's arrange something that will work better, and it did. You know, I can barely remember most of the classes that I took and, you know, that I got A's or B's in, but I remember all those independent studies really well because I worked so much harder on them. So, you know, maybe that's how you do it. You know, help the Sigma find the mission. Yan ZG sends a super chat. Thank you, Yan ZG. He says the Delta critiques are very helpful. Good, although they're not actually critiques. They're just observations. They're commentaries. You know, I understand that I'm very critical of the gammas, and I'm sure that occasionally my disdain for the alpha posturing comes across, you know. But the truth is there's nothing wrong intrinsically with any of these things. They just are what they are. What I'm mostly criticizing gammas for is their obviously self-destructive behavior. Like, they want to accomplish X, but what they are doing is guaranteed to prevent them from accomplishing X. So I'm going to point out to them, hey, if you want to accomplish X, you need to do it differently. You know, like with the deltas, I don't care if you're narcissistic. You know, maybe you have to be the competent, reliable, sufficient guys that you are. You know, just because I don't get why you care so much about what everybody else thinks of you, why you care so much that, you know, you want everybody to rely on you and think well of you, it doesn't mean it's wrong. You know, that's obviously a lot more normal than not caring at all. Silent Draco sends a super chat. Thank you. He says, gammas can go from helpful resource to whiny nightmare. Hard to manage. Yeah, they are hard to manage. I mean, gammas are probably in the top 10 reasons why I don't want to be a alpha. Because gammas have to manage them, and they have to manage them generally with kid gloves, because the gamma cannot handle a direct confrontation with an alpha. You know, and I think that's the thing that people underrate most about alphas, is that, you know, alphas are actually less narcissistic than most of their subordinates in the SSH. They don't just care what other people think about them. I mean, that's, if you think about it, that's kind of low SSH thinking in the first place. Alphas know they're awesome. Alphas believe they're awesome. Alphas tend to believe that they're a little bit more awesome than they actually are. Hawk says, a Delta gets promoted to Bravo the minute he can help the Alpha with the Gammas. Situationally. There's still mindset issues that, you know, it's not just about, you know, again, these are about patterns of behavior. But yeah, that is true. You're fulfilling a Bravo role if you're helping take some of the weight off the Alpha's shoulders. You know, and the funny thing is that the Alphas love that. They like nothing better. Mercurus asks, what do alphas think of sigmas? Alphas are very, very wary and suspicious of sigmas. Sigmas don't really threaten alphas so much as unsettle them, because they correctly detect that this is somebody who could threaten their position, and they don't get either the fact that the sigma doesn't want his position, generally, and more importantly, they find it very difficult. You know, when two alphas come together, they really don't tend to have much conflict, because usually they look at each other and then they quickly ascertain who is, you know, in the superior position. And so what happens is, if you've got two alphas that get together and they're capable of cooperating, one of them will automatically slot into the Bravo role. And they do this very easily. They do this very comfortably. There seems to be some, like, from my outside perspective, there seems to be some sort of like alpha handbook that alphas just get, you know, and they just, you know, the problem is sigmas don't do that. You know, we just don't pay attention to that at all. You know, I'll give you an example. The guy who owned a software distribution company, big successful one, he sold it for about $100 million to GT Interactive. Big guy, larger than life. His name is Chuck Bond, and you know, just I remember when I first met him. I met him, and he was with his newly acquired second wife. She's very pretty, very personable, and Space Bunny was actually with me at the time. And she was kind of like, she was kind of like blinking her eyes a bit, like after we were walking away from talking to them. She was like, wow, he's very overwhelming. I said, yeah, he's kind of one of those guys where just for whatever reason, you feel like you should be like doing the dog thing where you like roll over, expose your belly and pee on yourself, you know? And she's like, yeah, and so, this is before I had any concept of alpha or gamma or sigma or anything like that. But what was funny was that we had a meeting about, I don't know, 3, 4 months later. He wanted to sign my company to do a game for them. And so it made a huge impression on him because we go in there and we sit down in the conference table, and I'm wearing these prescription sunglasses, so I mean, I'm not going to take them off. They're how I see, right? And they were very stylish and very kind of cyber whatever. So it was pretty striking. And so we sit down at the conference table and we're talking, and Chuck is he's like squirming at the table, like literally, just can't get comfortable. And the meeting has gone on for like 20 minutes, and finally he says, look, it really makes me uncomfortable when I can't see your eyes. Would you take your glasses off? And I just said, no, and just continued. And it was funny because he told me years later, like, what a huge impact that had made on him. And in fact, when we later got into a legal battle with the company, with GT Interactive, he was the one who told them, I found this out later, he was the one who told them, look, we need to settle because I know this guy. He's not impressed with our lawyers and our threats and all that sort of stuff. He's just going to do what he's going to do. And because of the particular facts of the situation, they were going to lose. And he knew it. So but it's interesting that even a big, successful, powerful alpha like that, who doesn't know a thing about the SSH, instinctively understood the difference between, a lesser alpha and a sigma, and, altered his decision making and his behavior to take advantage of that. If he had not, if he had just thought of me as being a lesser alpha and stuff, they would have just banged their chest and relied on threats and all that sort of thing to accomplish their objectives. And it wouldn't have worked at all. Definitely, he was correct. Let's see. Do accolades help deltas to tell his inner dialogue, not good, fast, cheap enough to be quiet? No. I don't even know what you're talking about there. Not good, fat. I mean, to be honest, that sounds more gamma to me than delta. The delta, that sounds way more gamma than the delta knows he's competent. The delta, the one thing the delta has confidence in is that he can do the job. He can show up. He can get it done. In fact, he wants to tell you that. He wants to tell you how he's going to do it. He wants to tell you how confident he is. He wants to tell you that he's happy about being given the work. There's one delta that I work with, and I've literally told him, like, probably 15 to 20 times, I don't care. Like, we'll discuss something that needs to be done, and he'll tell me, and we'll decide mutually. I'm not just telling him what to do. I mean, we're discussing how we should do this, and then yeah, we'll decide on this, and then he inevitably wants to tell me how he feels about the way we've decided to approach the task at hand. Well, I'm really happy we've decided to do this because, I'm like, dude, I don't care. I, I mean, I'm glad you're happy, but that's always your response to, like, you've told me that 500 times. I don't need to hear it the 503rd time, you know? Whereas I'm sure an alpha would come up with some much more positive, spin on it, and I'm happy too. Jack says, do you feel social pressure and just choose to ignore it, or do you not even register it? Generally, I don't even register it. I mean, usually I'm just, I think anybody who has spent much time around me can tell you that I'm not fully there most of the time. Like, I'm usually as present as I need to be to function socially and not piss anybody off. Because that's my goal. My goal is to get along with everybody, right? But, I'll be talking to, I'll be talking to my family, or I'll be talking to my wife or somebody, and, they're talking about people. Somebody did something. That's all most people talk about. Somebody did something. Someone you don't know, or someone that you probably officially know, but you have absolutely no idea who it is or what they look like, or even necessarily their relationship to anybody in the room, did something that will have absolutely no impact on your life, my life, anybody else's life, to the best of your knowledge. And so, kind of like Marvin the robot in Hitchhiker's Guide, that's not pretty much ever a context that requires 100% attention. And so, sometimes I'm writing. Sometimes I'm trying to add up whether we can afford to move to a higher grade of leather for certain book lines. That's what I've been working on today. Just, thinking about other things, I mean, I have entire frameworks for books that I will never write that I've partially assembled in my head. I mean, there's a Theodicy of Evil, there's the Summa Economica, the history of Clown World, things that I just, and then there's the books that I'm actually writing right now. I'm actually writing the SSH book. I'm also writing my Japanese Eye novel. And so when there's like, when you say, do you feel social pressure? My answer is, what social pressure? To do what? And I'm fortunate in that I'm married to a woman who is either, it's one of three things. She's either generally indifferent to what social pressure I should be feeling. She might simply respect and the way that I am, or she might have given up. It's impossible for me to say. But, you know, just, you know, very recently she said, hey, would you happen to have any interest in, you know, going to dinner at this one new place with, you know, some of our friends? I said, yeah, sure, that'd be great, and it will be great. But I don't feel like the only pressure that I would feel is that I want her to be happy. And if my going will make her happy, then I would say I feel some, I would say I feel some pressure to do that, but that's not even the right word, because I don't feel any pressure. I mean, I want her to be happy. That will make her happy. That sounds good. Then I want to do that. I don't, you know, she's not pressuring me. Nobody's pressuring me. That being said, I do think that I do feel a strong sense of etiquette. I think it's very important. It's something that I really stress with our children. And I also, as you know, I mean, Social Galactic has probably got the highest level of, some of the highest levels of etiquette you can find on the internet. And you know, I think that's very important to me because, number one, it's how we distinguish ourselves from the animals. It's how we avoid a tremendous amount of unnecessary conflict. And for those of you who are concerned about social status, etiquette has always been used to separate the high from the low. You know, although I suppose you could say that there's also this sort of upper class that is beyond it and so forth, but that's just a different etiquette is all. I mean, they, in some ways they have even more intense etiquette, but again, I don't feel that as a social pressure. I don't feel like that's pressure from anyone else. That's just being aware of, understanding, and applying the rules. You know, it'd be like asking a wide receiver, do you feel pressure to try to keep both feet in bounds when you catch a ball? Well, no, that's just what the rules require, so I do it. I don't feel anything. Q1882 says, one of my favorite Vox lines was, you need a monster like me to repeatedly punch them in the face. That doesn't sound anything like what I imagined that I would say. But I'm sure you're right. Like sometimes people quote me and it sounds like something I would say. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like something I'd say. Or, you know, that sounds actually rather perspicacious. But that sounds a little bit, I don't know, sociopathic. And as we all know, I am not. But, you know, but keep in mind, here's the thing. The stuff that I do that you see as transparently Sigma, you know, whether it's, you know, when I said the Sigma is not going to show up, I mean, nobody expects me to go to like weddings and funerals and all that kind of stuff. You know, they know it's not happening. So in the same way, you are just as obvious with your own behavioral patterns. We all are. You know, I keep trying to stress that none of, people say, oh, you came up with the Sigma thing because you wanted to feel special. I'm like, you all thought I was an alpha, so whatever, you all thought that I was what everybody wanted to be like, and I actually had to explain, no, I'm not. And then somehow that's supposed to be status seeking. I mean, it's just more irrelevant nonsense. But the point is, everything we do, this applies to everybody. The SSH applies to everyone. If you can correctly identify an individual on the SSH, then those of us who have a good understanding of it can successfully anticipate what they're going to do, what they're going to say, with an alarming degree of reliability. And the funny thing is, the more you doubt it, the more obvious your behavior often tends to be. I mean, it's gotten almost boring at times. I think actually the better I've understood the SSH, the generally better my behavior has been in terms of the way that others perceive it. But I also think it's made me more introverted and isolated, just because it's become too easy to see what people are going to say and do before they do it. There's that book. It was a science fiction novel. Actually, I think it was John C. Wright, and the astrologers. They just became these incredibly wicked degenerates who were just incredibly bored because they knew everything that was going to happen before it did. Now, obviously, no one's ever going to reach that level of it, but it can be a little tiresome to, before you even say anything, to know what the reaction is going to be. And now, fortunately, I don't have a strong desire to finish people's sentences for them. I'm not saying I never interrupt. I'm not saying I never do it. I do from time to time. I try not to, and it's usually relatively easy for me to not do it. And I actually encourage my wife to remind me if I do it, because it's, people like to talk. People like to explain things. It's good to let them do so. And as I occasionally remind the various folks that I work with, because there's several of them that actually have a stronger desire to do that. Good luck successfully anticipating what I'm going to say. You're going to be wrong, so just don't. But keep these things in mind. What you're who you are. Be who you are. Be okay with who you are. And then when you understand yourself, learn to be a better version of who you are. Mercure says, my high school Sigma friend would always leave parties without telling anyone. He didn't like dealing with everyone asking him to stay. Yeah, that's very common behavior. I mean, I left my university 2 weeks before graduation, and I told 3 people that I was leaving. And it wasn't out of any drama. There weren't any problems or something. I was just eager to get back to Minneapolis. I mean, one of the best days of my life was the day after I got back. I drove 17 hours and 23 minutes, got home at 2:15, woke up, beautiful sunny day, green grass, the blue sky, the lake right outside my bedroom window. Called my two best friends that were both a bit older than me and done with the university. Called them up. We went out to our met at Paul's apartment. Went down to the perimeter. I remember, I'll never forget. Just, it was summer. The girls are all in their high heels and short skirts. We pull up in the Porsche and it's blasting. Oh no, it wasn't Porsche. It was, didn't have the Porsche yet, so it was pulled up in the Jaguar, and it was just blasting Ride on Time, you know, black box. And I mean, that whole thing was just, it was like new chapter, new day, you know, all the excitement of, you know, the first day of school, the first day of college, is the first day of post college. And you know, it was kind of funny because when you talk about it with people, when you say things like that, people are like, how could you leave? How could you not go? Dun, 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 dun. I wasn't thinking about any of that. I forgot to I didn't get my diploma until about 5 years ago. You know, I mean, I finished my diploma. I just didn't bother picking up the piece of paper. You know, it's, is that a gift? Is that a curse? I don't know, but you know, whenever you go into for a Sigma, the next chapter is the exciting one. You know, I remember you know, I can remember even back in college we were talking about, you know, death and dying and this and that, and I said, I mean, I remember everyone looking at me because I said, well, I said, I mean, I'm not in a hurry or anything. I said, but you know, I said, I can't wait. They're like, wait, what? I said, I said, we get to find out. It's the next chapter. It's like you're playing a video game and you finish level 1 and then all of a sudden there's that, I said, it's like that moment where you're sitting there, you just cleared level 1 and you don't know what level 2 is going to look like yet. You know, maybe that's more meaningful to Gen X arcade game players, but I mean, you know what I'm talking about, that you cleared a level for the first time, you cleared level 3 for the first time, and you don't know yet what color the screens at level 5 are going to be, what the new challenge is. You know, and I think what threw people a little bit was the genuine enthusiasm they could hear in my voice. You know, they're kind of like, whoa. But it wasn't, and you know, there wasn't any sort of, it had nothing to do with the, you know, all the goth nonsense and the posturing and the, you know, this, that, and the other thing. It was just, hey, the thought of the next chapter. And so, you know, I think that when that's, I think for a lot of people, that's very, very difficult to grasp. And it's probably good. I mean, you know, like I said, I regret not having stayed in touch with anybody from high school, and I regret not having stayed in touch with anyone from college. You know, I like it when, you know, somebody you know, hooks up with me on LinkedIn or back when I was on Facebook or whatever. It's fun. It's cool to see how they turned out. Sometimes weird to see how they turned out, but what, you know, you got to be who you are. Be the best you that you can be, but don't try to be something that you're not. Anyhow, this has been a long one. I didn't even think I was going to get around to streaming tonight, so apologies if I was rambling on, but we'll see you at the next dark stream. This is the dark stream. Oh, and I forgot to show you. after all this, I do need to show you this just because it's awesome. So this is a picture from the warehouse. Probably not from inside the warehouse, but you can see that the landmark Thucydides is a beast. It's an absolute beast. I'm not sure we shouldn't have made the logo a little bit smaller. On the other hand, that's about as big as it's ever going to be, so it's probably okay. But that's what the landmark Thucydides looks like next to the two Cambridge Medieval Histories. So that is the entire history subscription thus far. And those medieval histories are not small books. So that should give you an idea of what kind of tonnage we're dealing with here. And I'll show you one more picture just so you can see the front. That is the front of it. So it's real. And if you're a subscriber, it is coming your way sometime next week. So on that happy note, I wish you all a good evening. I'm Vox Day. This is the Darkstream.